Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm bringing you my results for my round of judging for the round 2 of the BookTube Prize non-fiction. So I was in group D and that contained 6 books which are all listed down below, and what I'm going to be doing today is sharing my ranking with you from 6th to 1st place, which will then be whichever, I think it's the top 3 are going to be potentially going through to the next round. So let's jump in. The results from this round have been announced and I'll link them down below, but at time of filming they have not been announced because I like to do my wrap-ups before the judging gets announced, just so that I can give you my thoughts without any interference at all about other people's rankings. The book that I am ranking in last place is Trick Mirror by Tolentino, I believe is the surname. I read this on ebook, so the cover will be here. This is a collection of essays and it's basically looking at kind of social media, our role within social media, and also how our current society has a tendency to reflect things back at us and how we understand ourselves within that. I'm kind of doing a lot of hand waving about this one because if I'm entirely honest, I didn't think that there was a particularly strong through line for all of these essays, which is one of the reasons why I'm ranking it so low. I really just endured this book. This seems to be a running theme on the BookTube Prize, is like the book that I put in last place I really viscerally dislike, and then the rest of them I had a pretty good time with. This one, I'm not a fan of essay collections in general, and I really don't think that Gia was bringing anything interesting to the table with anything she was saying. There was the standard conversations about like how we understand ourselves within social media, looking at like athleisure wear as being the new way that beauty standards like enforce things on women, some discussions about rape and rape culture, some discussions about reality TV, some discussions about the idea of like the bitchy woman and all sorts of things like that. But basically, as far as I was concerned, none of them were really doing anything interesting or unique that hasn't been done 1,000 times before online already, and I really didn't see why all these essays were bundled together and then had a price tag slapped upon them. Gia is actually a writer for Jezebel, I believe, and you can kind of tell that because actually all of the essays just felt like long form online essays that you could find anywhere, so I really don't see why she needed a whole book for it. Hence why it's in my 6th place. Now, potentially somewhat controversially, my 5th place ranking is actually She Said by Jodi Kantor and Twohey. So this is about the sexual harassment story, specifically the Harvey Weinstein story, which Jodi and Megan did break for the New Yorker, I believe, or the New York Times. And it's about their story, trying to get the various sources for it and then to be able to actually break the story, and then looking at the situation with the potential Supreme Justice Court guy afterwards as well, which they were somewhat involved in. This has been doing very well and is linked with also Catch and Kill, which is another book that is in the BookTube Prize but not in my grouping, that is about the exact same thing because there was 2 stories being built against Harvey Weinstein simultaneously. Now, for something like this, the reason why I'm ranking it 5th is whilst the Harvey Weinstein story is a crazy important story that sparked, you know, the Me Too movement really kicking off, and it's a very important thing to have happened in our world, I don't actually find the story about the story particularly interesting because they're quite repetitive. And I found this when I read Spotlight, which was about journalists breaking the story about the issues within the Catholic priesthood and all the scandal there. And again, it's the same thing, that basically it's a very repetitive story. It's a variety of different sources coming forward and then saying that they don't really want to go on record as the first one. They're scared and concerned, and it's all about trying to convince one to come forward so that the rest of them then can do it. There are some fairly big names in this, and in some ways that was mildly interesting because obviously Harvey Weinstein is a very like celebrity focused case because of working in the film and TV industry. But in general, I was quite bored most of the way through it. Like, I think if you're into investigative journalism or potentially like crime reporting in some way, you'd find this interesting. And like I'm saying, like, I'm really pleased that the Harvey Weinstein story was broken, and in some ways it's interesting to find out like what journalists have to go through to get their stories out there. But so I can see why it's made it this far in the BookTube Prize, but for me personally it doesn't do better than a lot of the books on this list, and it doesn't need to go any further than this. My 4th place book is The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11 by Garrett M. Graff. And I actually really struggled with placing this one 4th and my 3rd book in 3rd. I was really bouncing between the 2 different kind of books there. So what I'll do is I'll talk about my experience about this one, I'll talk about my 3rd place book, and then I'll talk about why I've decided to rank them where they are, because my reading experience between the 2 was so close in terms of like many things about them and about trying to rank them as a judge. So The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11 is, as the subtitle suggests, it's a collection of interviews and an oral history of the incidents of 9/11 and the terrorist attacks. It starts like the night before and then goes all the way through to kind of understand what happened in 9/11, what the experiences were like for the people involved, but also the people kind of surrounding it. And it really is like a big amalgamation of a bunch of different interviews and like first-hand experiences. I listened to this on audiobook because it's an oral history and it seemed very fitting, and it's a full cast that I think for me personally really helped to keep a lot of the names straight. Obviously it goes without saying that this is a very like intense book, but actually it was surprisingly uplifting and emotional in a like positive way, because whilst this is a horrifying thing where many people died, actually the stories of like people coming together was really, really powerful in it as well. It was also really interesting, the discussions of the various presidential aides and kind of the people around the president at the time, sort of talking through his response to it and what they had to do to try and ensure his safety, because obviously it's something which had never really happened before on American soil, and so you have protocols but you don't necessarily have protocols, and also you don't really know what you're dealing with. You know, the first one was considered to potentially be an accident, and then it obviously escalates from there, and you don't know who the targets are. So it's very easy in hindsight to look back and criticize some people's actions, but actually listening to the kind of justifications and discussions of decision-making processes made a lot of sense. Also, the like grand scale move to just ground all planes across America almost immediately after it happening was insanely impressive to learn about, and the actions of the flight that was where the passengers took it back from the hijackers was really, really interesting as well. So in all, it was a very fascinating experience, especially somebody who was technically like alive and has a vaguely living memory of 9/11, but really was too young to fully appreciate what was happening at the time. I'm not 100% certain exactly how old I was, probably like 8 or 9, and so for that experience that was very interesting as well, and kind of the change in how flying and flight security has changed was very fascinating. So it's an incredible read, and not as emotionally harrowing as I was potentially expecting it to be. Don't get me wrong, there are some like really intense moments clearly, but it wasn't quite the like I was dreading this book, I'm not gonna lie. I really wasn't looking forward to it. I thought it was going to be emotionally ruinous, which is not something that you want right now, especially with everything that's going on, but it was actually surprisingly uplifting. So book 3, my third place book, is The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present by David Treuer. So this is looking at the history of Native Americans and Native America, as well as America, and how it kind of is understood. Wounded Knee was a massacre that occurred in 1890, and it is often considered to be like the death of the Native American. There's a book which is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which I think this is what this is kind of riffing off of, with the term of The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, which is quite a damning look at the Native American culture as it is now. I believe, I've not actually read that book, and this is David Treuer's response to that as a Native American and also as a historian, and sort of trying to give a voice back to a culture and a society which has been very much overlooked, and that actually they're not completely dead in the water. So the first third of the book is looking at the early experience of the Native Americans with various settlers who came over from Europe, and then we do really get a blow-by-blow account of the various things that have both happened to and have been done by the Native Americans to try and either reclaim land or have it taken away from them, etc, etc, kind of their fight for rights. This is a crazy informative book that has got so much information in it. It's almost mind-boggling. I mean, it's huge. It's the longest one of all of them. It's very, very dense, very intense. Lots of names, lots of dates, lots of information. The general sense, it does kind of keep itself moving fairly well, but I definitely enjoyed the prehistory, like the earlier history stuff rather than the more modern day stuff, which is not really surprising because, again, that's the kind of thing that I do tend to read. There were also a few really nice moments in some of the later day stuff, the more modern context, that was actually like interviews of people who are alive today and really learning about their lifestyle, which grounded the overarching big macro picture of what David Treuer was talking about with some various individuals. He's a really cool guy. I think his name is Billy, and he like really lives off the land, and that was a lovely chapter. I really enjoyed that whole section. So like with this one and with the oral history of 9/11, it was really hard to try and rank them, and I went backwards and forwards when I was thinking about this, because basically, if I'm talking objectively, I think I actually enjoyed the oral history of 9/11 as a reading experience a lot more. I blitzed the audiobook in only a couple of days. It was completely phenomenal, and it was very intense but very interesting, whereas The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee took me ages to read and really felt like a slog, especially in the middle, just because of how dense information wise it was. However, I do think one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the 9/11 book so much is because it was an oral history and I was listening to it on audiobook, and a key part of the judging is to not let the format sway you, and I'm pretty sure if I had actually read them both in the same format, whether that be both in print book or both in audiobook, I actually think that The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee would have come out on top on both of them. However, I think that the audiobook of the 9/11 book is actually better than the print book in terms of my reading experience, my enjoyment of it, than The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. So it's really unfortunate that that's kind of the way that that's come down to it, and I shouldn't be judging the books in general based on that. I should be trying to base it on the actual content itself, and in which case I think The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee marginally pips the 9/11 book to the post. And one thing that really helped to solidify this was when I was kind of like talking it through with my partner and being like, hey, I really am struggling to rank these. He turned around and was just like, which one would you want to reread? And for me, it's clearly going to be The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. I don't think I'd ever re-listen to The Only Plane in the Sky, and I think that that again needs to be the tipping point for them. So that is why this one's in 3rd place and the other one is in 4th. So we're now moving into my top 2. Very exciting. There is almost nothing between these two books as well. We really have like the books further down the end that I was like fine with, blah blah, my like 3rd and 4th vying, and then my 1st and 2nd vying. It really was like groupings and clumpings of rankings with this reading experience. So the only difference between these two books in terms of my ranking is purely my enjoyment of them. I think in terms of like as examples of non-fiction and good non-fiction, they are so on par and both so good that the only thing that I'm counting like to try and compare them is my enjoyment of them, and I listened to them both on audiobook, so I think I can do that. So the one that comes in 2nd place is Sea People by Christina Thompson. This is In Search of Ancient Navigators of the Pacific, or The Puzzle of Polynesia. It has a couple of different subtitles, and this is basically looking at ancient Polynesian culture and basically how the heck did these people get on these islands. So the Polynesian culture is a huge cluster of islands that are scattered across the Pacific Ocean. It's a huge, ridiculously large range of like area that it covers. It's there's kind of like a triangle. The triangle is Hawaii, Easter Island and New Zealand, and that's the Polynesian triangle in general. And this is basically a history of Western civilization's discovery of people on these islands in the Polynesian Triangle, and then Western interactions with trying to understand how Polynesian people got to these islands, and some of the anthropological explanations for the prehistoric people who would have got to become the basis of Polynesian culture, as well as a history of Western and Polynesian interactions. It's quite a like complicated book in a lot of ways. I wouldn't say it's a history of Polynesian culture strictly, because it really is looking at the puzzle of Polynesian people and how the heck did they get on these tiny islands, but also like within that is understood how we as people like collectively have understood history and the various developments of things like anthropology and carbon dating and all sorts of science like that, and like linguistic studies. And as much of it is about Western interaction with the Polynesian culture and Polynesian history as it is about the Polynesian culture and Polynesian history. As somebody who is a huge fan of history, I deeply enjoyed this book. I thought it was so fascinating. It's really hard to pull out anything in particular that really kind of resonated as being more or less interesting, because the whole thing was just such a good time. I actually read it for Springathon, which I hosted, which was so fitting, which lovely, it fitted for the travel prompt and for the ocean prompt because it has sea on the cover, but it was a really lovely time reading about it. And since having read this book, the like puzzle of Polynesia has come up in several other non-fictions I've been reading at the moment, which is just so lovely when that kind of like happens, where you get immersed into a topic and then you spot it in a bunch of other different areas of how it connects. So very cool. If I had to put my finger on like one particularly awesome area, there was a really cool look at like different ancient languages and the oral tradition, and also using linguistics to try and track how the islands, like where they would have got to, and like the various paths that they would have taken. So that was really, really, really cool. So I definitely appreciated that greatly. Fantastic book, would recommend to everybody. My number one book, my top one from Group D, is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of Virginia Hall, dubbed World War II's Most Dangerous Spy, by Sonia Purnell. Non-fiction has long ass titles, I'm not gonna lie. So this is a history book specifically looking at the life of Virginia Hall, who was a World War II spy who was based in France for the bulk of World War II, and she is credited with starting some of the earliest French resistance and keeping it going, and really was one of the earliest people to build these huge networks of spies in France. This is such a cool book, and she is such a cool woman. It details her entire life, so it does include some stuff before the Second World War, which was very informative, and I actually didn't mind anywhere near as much as I normally do in a biography, which witters away about their like early school years or whatever. This one was actually felt a lot more relevant and was really talking about some of her early travel and exploration she did that really set the stage for why Virginia Hall would end up becoming the spy that she was, and then did include some of her later life, including some of her frustrations after the war about the fact that as a female she was not getting the respect that she really deserved compared to a lot of her male colleagues, because of like the fact that she was a woman, despite the crazy cool work that she'd done. What makes Virginia Hall even cooler, by the way, which I totally forgot to mention, is that she did everything that she did in the Second World War with only one leg. She has technically a disability. She had an amputated leg from like just below knee down, I believe, on one of her legs. It was a shooting accident, like a recreational shooting accident. She shot herself, not the most graceful, dignified thing in the world, but it really frames a lot of the discussion about her like tenacity in life, and also in terms of like as an identifying marker. Being a spy was something quite as iconic as only having one leg made that quite dangerous for her, so her ways of trying to keep it hidden and keep it secret was very impressive. Generally very, very cool. Is an amazing look at some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes of World War II as well. I know World War II as a like topic in history is super played out in a lot of non-fiction and fiction, but this I found really interesting, and it actually sparked me going and watching a documentary on Dunkirk in more detail, because there were conversations about that in this. Really cool, fascinating woman, amazing book, totally deserves top slot. So that's it. Those are my rankings for this round of judging. I am intending on taking part in the next round of judging. I will probably already know by the time this video goes up whether I am going to be doing that or not, and like I said, the results will be out, so I will link in the description box the video that announces the winners, etc, etc, and I might even star the ones that go through so that you know from my round whether I was correct or not, whether I agreed with the general consensus. I think if I had to predict anything, I think She Said is going to go through, and I don't think that that's a waste. I don't think that should. I think that's a hype situation going on there. But anyway, so that's it from me. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.